Call our meeting for Monday, August 7th for the Beaumont Finance and Audit Committee meeting, and let's go ahead and call that to order. If I could get roll call, please.
Let's see. We've got me, Adriana Pfeiffer here. John Chamberlain. Stephen Martino. Here. Joanne Roberts. Steve Cooley.
Here.
Richard Beneke.
Present.
John Hallowell.
Here.
Ray Santos.
Right here.
Elaine Morgan.
Here.
Sharon Geiser.
Right here. Next.
I know. Mike Laura.
Here.
Mary Pro Tem Carroll.
Here.
And I think I got everybody right.
Looks like it. Thank you. And if we could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I do have an adjustment to the agenda tonight, only to add a discussion for the reschedule of our September 4th meeting. That is Labor Day this year, so we'll need to reschedule that. Is there any other adjustments to the agenda? No? Okay. Any conflict of interest disclosure? All right, we'll move on to public comment. And we have a public speaker tonight?
Yes, Judy Bingham.
Okay, let me go ahead and read the my little notice I have to read. Any one person may address the committee on any matter not on this agenda. If you wish to speak, please fill out a public comment form provided at the back table and give it to the committee chair or secretary. There is a 3-minute limit on public comments. There will be no sharing or passing of time to another person, and state law prohibits the committee from discussing or taking action brought up by your comments. And our first speaker.
Judy Bingham, 115 Minnesota. I hope I can get some answers tonight. I know no one can answer during this, but I've asked this question in City Council. I've asked the treasurer to find an answer for me, and no one seems to know the answer to my question. And that is, which is the correct set of financial statements? This one that was approved by council on February the 7th, it says here in draft form, or the one that's up on the website. And I'd like to make some comments. Federal SEC laws requires an audit committee for all government agencies that acquire municipal bond debt. So you are responsible for that. You are the audit committee. The city's audits are the prime responsibility of this committee. 1934 SEC 10A Audit Requirements. 2. Responsibilities relating to registered public accounting firms. The audit committee of each issuer shall be directly responsible for the appointment, compensation, and oversight of the work of any registered public accounting firm employed by the issuer for the purpose of preparing or issuing an audit report or related work. And each such registered public accounting firm shall report directly to the audit committee. I believe you had the auditors reported in December. And at that audit, I'll quote Greg Fankhanel when he presented it to this committee. It wasn't appropriate to show your own debt as an asset And in fact, that is what has been done. Not on this one, not the one that the council approved, but on this one up on the website. When a city acquires bond money, it is recorded as an asset. When the city spends the money building infrastructure, the bond asset is reduced and an infrastructure asset is created or increased. Beaumont acquired bonds, but embezzled or misused all the money and never constructed any infrastructure to record as assets. The bonds listed as assets were removed from the City of Beaumont's approved 2015 financial statements, then added back onto the 2015 financial statements 6 weeks after the audit was approved by council. So, in closing, could someone please answer the question, which is the correct set of financial statements? And as I told our treasurer, somebody needs, if we cannot get an answer, somebody needs to turn this over to the state attorney general.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other speakers?
No.
Okay, let's move on to our action items. We have adoption of the minutes. I did not find any corrections that needed to be made. Did anybody else have any notations or corrections? Okay. I'll entertain a motion.
Move that we accept the minutes.
I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay,
Madam Chairman, I'm abstaining because I was absent.
perfect. Okay. Okay, establishment of member terms. Were we having a staff report on this, or does anybody know if that was just for our review?
I believe you'll find that there was posted as a part of the minutes, the staff report.
No, I meant on the establishment of the member terms
That's what I'm saying. There is a staff report that was filed.
with council
No, it's,
Yeah.
It went to the council.
It did.
and was approved by
It was
council?
approved.
Okay, all right,
and you have it as a part of your attachment to the meeting.
okay. Okay, good.
So that would be just to receive. and file.
Receive and file.
Just so that we're all updated on what the
Okay.
adaptation.
I had a question on it, and a simple question. The planning commission is a 4-year term appointment. Most committees that I have been involved with over the years are 4-year appointments. I'm just wondering the rationale for a 2-year rotating appointment.
I think part of the rationale, and you correct me if I misstate anything, Councilmember Lara, but I think it was because there's 2 council members on this committee, and because of the appointing every year that the mayor does to the committee, and because of election terms, that probably wasn't a good comparison to compare it to 4 years with the Planning Commission. No? Wasn't that the discussion? Yeah. So it was made shorter. If at any point in the future that doesn't seem to work out, it's also a brand-new committee. So that gives a little flexibility there. And one of the comments, too, that was shared in council was that it's a big committee. And so we didn't want to put a burden on any citizens where they were committed for an overly long period of time. We don't mind burdening the Planning Commission. I'm just joking.
Especially you.
Don't quote me on that.
I can understand
But,
the
yeah.
rationale. The problem I have with it, because I was a planning commissioner for 30 years, and it took me several years to get up to speed on what's happening there. And I think other committees like this one, or even the economic development committee, take some seasoning. What I mean is, you know, we all bring different backgrounds and experiences to committees, and it takes a while to get adjusted to the nuances and everything else that goes along with being on a committee. So, you know, 2 years goes by awful quickly, and then all of a sudden, boom, I guess you can be reappointed. But
Yeah, that was mentioned in
That
the
was
meeting, is that any of us that served on the committee were welcome to come back and, you know, say, I'm more than happy to do another 2
I
years.
think experience is important.
I think so too.
Put your time in, it's like we apprentice here for years. Yeah. But anyway, no, that's fine.
That's a valid point that was discussed, how valuable it would be to allow people to continue. And that was one of the things that the council was hoping that people would want to continue beyond that point, but didn't want to overly burden people out of the gate.
Madam Chairman,
Uh-huh.
I tried to make an additional point at the council meeting, and I may not have made it as specific as I should have, but with respect to Mr. Beneke pointing out the 2 years, I tried to point out that we've appointed the city treasurer, or the council has appointed the city treasurer to be on that, and she has a 4-year term. So the 2 years don't necessarily apply to every person on this committee. The treasurer, unless she was to resign her position, will be in the seat for 4 years.
That makes a lot of sense, yes, because the treasurer would be on the committee automatically.
And the only way I could see that changing is if the council would decide that there would be an alternate or something that, but as it
Right.
currently stands now, the 2 years does not hold for every member of the committee.
That's true. Okay, we'll make sure to make a point of that. Thank you. Any other comments on terms?
Do we need a vote to receive and file, or?
I think we could, just to
Yes.
make it official.
I'll move. No second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, and then Milana, review and discussion of the fiscal year 14-15 internal control report issued by auditing.
Yes. We've gone through this before, and I believe that we were going to go through it again for the benefit of the new members of the committee. Each one of the findings that are listed here have been addressed by management, changing procedures, our new software, and so forth. We even have a few where we're testing out a couple of thoughts on how to best implement internal controls, what kinds work best, so we can try and streamline as much as we can. There's only one of these items that is still only under discussion and it hasn't been implemented, and that is related to 2015-21. And as you'll see when we look at the financial reports in the next item, there is a multitude of issues that we have. And so when we do implement the methodology for the overhead allocation, we have a lot more specific things that we need to also include in that. So that one we have not come to full term of how we're going to back up that documentation, but we are still discussing that and looking at different ways to capture the data.
And that was 2015-21?
Yes.
Okay.
And here it comments that that will be completed by the end of 2016-2017. Are we on track to complete that at that time?
No. We thought we could until we started looking at some of the deeper issues that go with it. And as soon as we realized how much bigger it is, we decided we needed to really address everything at once. So we're still looking at the best way to capture the information in order to properly determine those overhead rates.
On page 9, on the recommendation, Milana,
Yes.
minor point, do we have the due dates established and written down for the various procedures? Do we have like a record of the due dates?
The specific procedures of the software, we haven't gotten those in writing, but we
Okay.
do have the overarching procedures that we follow, just not the specific, how do you get to A, where do you get B, how do you change C, that kind of thing we haven't done yet. We have recently hired a new member of the finance staff, and she and I have been working closely together since she started, and she is working with me to make sure that the checklist that I had developed for all of the things we need to do every month, we're looking at that now to make sure that it's complete, and then from there, we're going to begin on some of the more specific, like how-tos, so that we have a better manual. And I thought having her learning it as we go was a great way to start putting some of that in writing, because as she's learning it, we can determine what needs to be in that procedure, the specifics. So we're working on that together.
Do you have an anticipated date when that will be completed?
It's not the highest thing on our list of priorities, but I would like to have it all complete before the end of this calendar year. That would be my goal, is that we have something in writing with all of our new procedures and all the new softwares across all the different elements before the end of the calendar year.
And that's just with your department? correct?
Just with my department.
Okay.
These would be the very specifics, the specific how to, where does it come from,
Okay.
what's the responsibility, all of that.
Now, as we've finished out, we're working on the 2015, 2016 currently? Or is
Yes.
that- Okay. And then this similar report will be done at the end of that period too?
Correct.
So we're going to see a lot of the implementation that you've done so far to come through with that report. And when do we expect that?
I actually spoke with the auditors today. We're working on putting the transit audit final pieces together. And then we'll be putting together the cities. So I'm hoping in September we'll have the citywide audit report first draft to go through.
Okay, I'm sorry, when?
September?
Okay.
Towards the end of September?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, good.
So are you going to allow this rolling error to continue?
Judy, you could hold out, I'll open public comment again.
I would like a comparison done with the financial reports that are on the website, with the financial reports that were adopted, and see if by any chance we have the wrong thing posted somewhere.
For the internal procedures, the overarching accounting principles?
Would you compare that, and would you compare just have somebody, maybe your new person?
Sure.
Compare just so that she's also familiar where everything is.
Right.
And just make sure we don't have any lack of integrity between what reports are where.
Right. I will do that. I'll go have her take a look at those policies. I know that they were drafted a couple of times before, so I'll make sure the final version is what's on the website.
All right, thank you very much.
Any other comments on this report? And are we wanting to receive?
We did
This or just a
already. So,
review?
yeah, right. So this is
Okay.
really just to take a look at its status of where we're at on these items.
Would you note that Joanne arrived in the time so that she has it on record?
Okay. The records show that Joanne arrived at 6:20 to the meeting. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's see. I think we have a continuation, don't we, Milana? We're going to move to number 5 now, the financial report, the review of the current reports and availability of ongoing reports for periodic review. And I think this is a follow-up from one of our previous meetings with the potential reports that we had to review and?
It is.
Wonderful.
So I started with a staff report, so you'd have a cover letter kind of explaining what it is that's being provided to the committee. And there's two little boxes on the first page. So I just wanted to kind of tell you what I've given you that's a little different from these boxes. The first is that I included a citywide set of reports. The second thing is that I included a CFD specific set of reports. And the third thing to let you know is that there is no treasurer's report because when I ran the report, it won't pull any data. So I'm a little bummed by that, but I'm going to work with a software company and see if I can get that one to work. That was the one that this committee really wanted. So when I ran it and it was all zeros, I'm not sure what I'm not entering for it to pick up the information out of the general ledger. There's got to be something. So
And
I'll
that
figure
was
out what
which
that
one?
is. That's the treasurer's report, the next to
Treasurer's
last one.
report.
Mhm.
Okay.
So hopefully, at the next meeting, we'll have that, whatever is wrong with it, fixed so that we can use that report. Okay. So I did a set of reports, and it might be a little bit of overkill. There's a whole lot there, but I did May 2017 and the 11 months year to date so that we'd have a chance to look at absolutely everything. The first page behind it is the flow chart of the department and then how we've structured the funds with the new software. I also gave you this page loose in case you need to refer to it since it ended up upside down on the second page.
Okay.
So that you could see really how it is that we've put the whole thing together. So of course the citywide is everything all in one. And so then when we talk about the general funds, it's just those three. Reserve funds, it's just those. Since I put together a CFD specific group of reports where the CFD funds are in the reserved, capital, and agency funds, when you look at those, they are not there because I decided to pull those out separately since those are the more important funds that people have more questions about. Okay. So I started with the citywide financial statements. And I have to apologize. There's a page in there where the back side of the page is upside down. And they don't actually say anything down the center. And I did that because these are specific accounts set up related to some open and some closed police cases. They're evidence that was, taken from the person who was charged. And so we have to hold any cash that they have in trust. That's what those are. So I can't give you the case numbers and the people's names. So that's the only thing that's missing is that information. But some of them are interesting. I mean,
So these restitutions and fines,
no. These are if someone was arrested and they had cash in their pocket.
okay.
This is
So
that
these are
kind of
seizure
evidence.
funds.
Right, from arrests,
Right.
yes. Because there are also seizure funds from raids and things like that. Those are accounted for in our restricted funds. We have a state program and a federal program that has seizure funds. So I call this evidence because it was on the person when they were arrested, and the seizure funds are basically cases that
Okay,
that
I'm
we're
still a
involved
little
in.
confused. So are these funds we're holding in trust?
Correct.
Okay, so they're not city funds?
No.
Okay.
Now, the seizure funds, are those actually, we have seized them and they're ours?
They are not ours.
Or are they
Those
still
are also not ours.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
So when you look at the structure of all of the different funds, the evidence funds are in an agency fund. And an agency fund is there's assets and there's liabilities that we're holding for somebody else that we owe to somebody else. And there's real specific rules that apply to evidence funds, and that's something that I'm getting started on. Since we're holding it in trust, we're just holding them in trust. We haven't done anything else. But you have to know, has the case gone to trial? If it's gone to trial and the person was exonerated, then they can request their funds back. We've done some of those refundings back to the individual. If they're found guilty, then based on what kind of crime it was and what time frame it occurred in, it has to be held for a certain amount of time, and then it can be used, but only in public safety under certain.
Right.
There's a ton of rules. So right now we're just holding them until we have the opportunity to sit down and really get a status on all of them. The seizure funds are a little different. They are held in trust while it's an open case. When the case is closed, all the funds are remitted to the county, where the county then determines all of the involved agencies, how much each one gets. So then we send all the money to them, and then they send a piece of it back to us. So that's how we would have income in the restricted fund. Still has to be used only for public safety, though.
Now, if they have something other than money,
That's a totally different matter.
do we show that on
No.
our books anywhere?
No, only the cash, because it gets deposited into the bank, and then we're responsible for it because it's in the bank.
And that goes into a PD ledger?
It goes into the agency fund. If you're talking about the actual objects, those are logged into a separate system, and they are kept in a lock and key in the evidence room. That's not something that's recorded because we can't ascertain values. That's not something that we're supposed to do, but they do have to keep, and they do keep a complete ledger of the case, the name, and what item it was, and they're all logged in the evidence room.
What if that's converted to a monetary value?
We aren't allowed to do that.
Probably not unless there's an auction on the.
Correct. There's a ton of rules, so.
That's correct.
Right.
That's what he's probably
Oh,
looking
okay.
at.
Okay, I was like,
Yeah.
we wouldn't just.
Convert that to-
Convert it.
Sorry.
Right. If we're allowed and we're given the ability to do that, and then,
Do an
yes,
auction
then we
on
would
that.
go through auction.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm curious why these are listed in such detail as opposed to just be lumped for the purposes of presentation.
The reason is because in the old software program, that's how they tracked it. And so with the new software, I just had them convert it and bring it over because I haven't had time to figure out where it all sits and why, to determine if it still belongs there or it needs to be moved to something different, be used for something different. Once I'm able to go through all this detail, my plan is to not show it this way. We
'Cause it
would just have a
it would
liability.
appear to me that this is giving an impression of having assets the city does not have.
In the citywide, that is correct, because we hold them in trust. When you look at the actual just general fund, it's not there.
Right.
They're only in the agency fund. So this is citywide. This is everything, whether it's an agency fund, whether it's restricted fund, general fund, doesn't matter. It's all the books and records citywide. It's everything. So that's why these are here.
And also sitting on the liability side.
Correct. That's
That's
right.
the thing I was just getting at. also.
Right. Right. It's an asset and it's a liability.
Good, thank you.
And it might be helpful to note, too, that we just switched over software. When was that, Milana?
We first got it December the 1st, and
Right.
we've been struggling to get everything cleaned up since then. Still have a little bit to do, but
Right.
we're
And I think it
way
was
further.
about 2 months ago, we went in and Milana kind of spit out potential reports that we could get. And we kind of had a discussion about what we'd like to see, how often we'd like to see it. So this is coming back with some actual numbers.
Yes.
We didn't have any numbers 2 months ago. So this is like here's the potential, and that's what we want to discuss tonight is how often, what kind, and when should we be looking at what types of reports. So it's good to see that you have, at least you're being able to draw these numbers in now, and then I think once we go through what you've given us, then have a discussion on what we'd like to see in the future.
Right. And that treasurer's report, at least that's what the system calls it, was so awesome. It was, change in cash by all the different types, revenues, and expenses. So I'm hoping that it's just something simple. There's a box somewhere maybe that I didn't click, something, so we can use that, because that would be the best overview, summarized overview. But
Okay.
hopefully next time I can get that to run.
Are you getting, excuse me, lost my voice. Are you getting vendor assistance on the problem? Or are you just kind of,
No, I have a support question in, so I
Okay.
haven't heard back from them, but I
All right.
probably will hear from them tomorrow. They're in a different time zone, so
good.
that's the citywide. So if you keep going through, you'll find a divider that will tell you general fund. If you also look at the bottom of the page, you'll see all these page numbers, 35 of 39. I didn't give you all 39 pages. There's a ton of detail that's available, just anything you want to look at. So the next one, though, the next divider is the general fund, which is this one, just like that. Okay. So there's quite a few pages, and then you'll find general fund.
Okay.
I know there's some, I should have stapled each group separate, but you know, at the time I wasn't thinking like that, so. Okay, so the first page behind it is the balance sheet of our 3 general funds. The balance sheet, it's in like a summarized format. What we have is just the general fund, which is the operations of the city, the actual city itself. And then we have the successor agency, which is what's left over since the state did away with our redevelopment agency. There's still just a little bit of activity there that we're getting close to cleaning up. And then the last is the self-insurance, and that's where we have funds for legal cases that are open and such. That one, what happens is at the end of the year, at June, the net activity of the self-insurance will go to 0 because we go through, evaluate, and do allocations of those costs into the general fund. The reason that we do it that way is because within the self-insurance fund, if you look at the detail of it, you'd know all of the litigation, and we don't make that public. So that's why it gets allocated over, so that it can be put into the general fund in a different manner, the activity. Behind that, yes, ma'am?
Could you maybe explain a little bit about the elimination of the successor agency amount and having that go away for the new committee members so that they have a
You mean the fact that the
understanding?
redevelopment agency does not technically exist? Yes, I've forgotten the years. They all melt together, but 2013? 14. The state of California did away with redevelopment agencies. So any activity that was in the redevelopment agency moved into what they called a successor agency. Then there was no longer funds available for any use at all for any redevelopment agency, and whatever assets that were held in the redevelopment agency belonged to the state, and they took them. So these are just a few items that the city has left. One is related to some land that was in the redevelopment agency that's still owned by the city. That did not transfer to the state. And then I have a cash balance, and I don't know why, but it's small, so I will figure that one out. But the successor agency will eventually just be gone.
Okay.
Right, right.
Now, aren't we trying to recoup from the state? Is that still an ongoing issue there?
Yes.
And would those funds go into this account if we do receive them?
No, they would go in the general
And
fund.
straight to general fund? Okay.
So the statement behind that balance sheet is the income statement, if you will, for the general fund, where we have the different revenues, and then I have each of the departments so that we could see how each one is looking as far as their own expenses. This is a budget versus activity, so we can see what's in line and where we're at for each one of these groupings. Some of them are up, some of them are down, and that's not really unexpected at this point. There's no income statement for the redevelopment agency, successor agency, and then, as I said, I can't provide the income statement activity for the self-insurance, but it all does roll up into the general fund at the end of the year.
Okay, on the group summary that you have in here, I really like seeing the original budget and current budget.
Yes.
And that current budget is going it's a year-to-date accumulative.
Correct.
Okay.
And what's really weird about this, though, for this particular year is when the budget data came over from the other system, because we had moved things around in the new system, when it came over, it wasn't necessarily in the right place. So I've tried to find all those spots and fix it, which is why the current total budget is a little bit different, or a lot different in some places, than what it says is the original budget. The original budget's what came over in the conversion. So the current total budget is where we're at right now, which was the very original budget plus the few budget adjustments that we had through council this year. I think there were 3.
Okay.
So is it a variance between current total budget and the current activity?
Correct, the fiscal activity.
And fiscal activity would be for that month?
It's the fiscal activity is the 11 months, July
Okay.
of 16 through May of 17. What it says is period activity, that's only the activity of
particular
May.
Okay. So if we were looking at a report like this and going through and seeing the variances, that's something that we could talk to you about, that we would see in this report, but not necessarily in next year's report, because the new budget
It starts over.
would start over and we'd have a clean slate with
Right,
each one
each
of these
fiscal
correctly
year.
identified, correct?
Right. So each year you have a budget and an income statement. It all resets through the equity accounts. In the new year, it starts over.
Okay, and this is the general fund account, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And again, what you want from us tonight, in going over these reports, is for us to make sure we raise any point where we want it expressed differently, in more detail, termed differently, whatever it is that we need to make sure that we're tracking it from an oversight basis.
Right. If there's
So-
too much information, we can summarize it at a higher level. If there's certain areas that more information would be nice to have, I can provide it in the next package as well.
Okay. And I see you've done basically the same thing for the restricted funds?
Yep, they're all kind of following that same format, but you
Okay.
can see how that page I gave you separate will help you know, okay, yeah, the restricted funds, yep, there they all are. Like I said, with the exception of the CFD, because I set it up in its own grouping to see them all together.
Okay.
With the restricted funds, the ones that I wanted to bring to your attention, the first is CDBG, and that is 215, Fund 215. It looks odd. It looks a little unusual. There is a lot of matching of data that has to occur, and it doesn't happen until June. So the June statement, that will look very different. Yes.
So if you've moved on, I'm behind you.
That's
maybe,
fine.
in the thinking here. But, so if I'm looking at, you just gave us the example of the general fund and then how you break it down by department and then the different columns for tracking, et cetera.
Yes.
So this is as of May 31st. So that's approximate. So we should be able to scan down the percent remaining and any percentage that is way off of where it should be on a summary level, a flag for us that we might want to ask further questions on.
Correct.
So
It's kind of tough at this point in time. There's a lot of large differences. And part of that is because we've moved things around in the new software. And some of it is because when the 15-16 budget was developed, it was developed without knowing, the 16-17, without knowing everything still. Having numbers still moving, not being sure where things were going to land, plans to do one thing, but it may not have happened right away, like in trying to put personnel into the wastewater facility and try to rely less on our consultant. That didn't quite work as fast as we wanted it to, so the budget is off on that. But yes, anything that has a significant difference, we can definitely get explanations for, or we can look into more detail, because there's a lot of detail that's still below this level.
And next year, these summary percentages should be much closer
Right.
on target for mid-year points, quarter points, et cetera.
Right. We have a much better handle on some of these things and their activities now. And Todd labeled our 17-18 budget which I thought was good. He labeled it a gateway budget because now we're starting to come through the gate. We've got a handle on things, and now we can budget according to where we really think things are going to land, should land. We have information to base it on.
And how current of numbers can we get? We're looking at May on this report, and we're in August. So how current of a report can we get this on a monthly basis?
Right. On the back of the staff report, I have like a calendar of timing. The June statement won't be ready for review until probably late in September or in October, only because we have to leave the year open in order to collect all the accruals that attach at June 30. So I'm hoping that we have July. I can't remember. Did I put September or October?
That would be
I think it was October. Until we can start getting everything caught up on the ability, because the month will end, and then the Finance Committee meets the first Monday of the next month. So
we're actually
July
a
would be
month.
August. We can't be done that fast. So once we get everything moving coordinated, it would be the first part of September. You would see July, because we're going to need that timing in order to close the month. And then it would go to council at their second meeting that same month.
So what is the time frame when you anticipate having the new software up and running properly? Time frame for that, and then going forward, is there a monthly soft close?
There can be a monthly soft close, and that actually is the intention, is if we can get our checklist and we can start getting everyone geared to following the checklist on a consistent monthly basis, we can have monthly soft closes. So you would have July in September, you would have August in October, you would have September in November.
So when would you anticipate closing those? Would it be 5 days after the end of the month, 10 days after the end of the month?
The end of the following month. So July would be
So you're gonna
closed
take
the
30
end of
days to close.
August. Right.
Okay.
So that brings us 3 months behind on,
2.
we would be seeing
Because you
in,
couldn't see the statement in a day or 3. That's not physically possible. And I don't want to take the financial reports to council until the committee has seen it. So it would be a full month from the month actually ending, a full month, and it would come to committee. And then the second council meeting of that same month, then they would get it as well.
I'm not sure we're on the same page. When I'm talking closing, I'm talking, when would you close the books for that month? How many days after the physical end of the month?
As soon
Not
as
when will the report be ready?
When it would be anything that happened and occurred up to the last day of the month, period.
But
So
how
we
many-
don't back
how many
anything
days-
up.
How many days would you have to have that information available? Not in a report form, but, when are you going to hold the departments or the entities responsible to have all of their information in? How
The
many days
information
after
is
the
in.
month?
The information is in as of the morning of the first day of the next month. It's there. The problem is converting that data and getting it posted into the general ledger. We still have another module that has to be updated to the current level, and it's not there yet, and we're not slated to get that until later in the fall. So we can't have completely integrated systems yet. So there's still a manual element to it, and until that occurs, we won't have anything immediately. It takes a little while to get, and it's the cash receipts. It takes a little while to get all the cash receipts input into the new general ledger from the cashiering system.
Okay, and I understand that. So the absolute bottom line, at what point in time is this new software and the software conversion expected to be done, final, finished?
As soon as I do this conversion of the cashiering piece, then yes, we're done. So if we're slated to have it done in October, by the end of October, we should be implementing everything on a consistent, integrated, day-to-day
Including this
basis.
last module you just mentioned.
That's the one. That's the one we need in order to complete the loop.
Thank you.
Alana, I'm going to take a question from the floor. Go ahead, Judy.
Milana, have you closed the June 30th, 2016 books yet?
I've closed them, but the auditors have not.
Because I've been asking for the general
Correct.
ledger for a long, long time. I just want all of you to know that.
Okay, Judy, thank you. Okay, so right now, we're looking at a 3-month. Is that kind of the time frame? And then we're hoping to catch up to a 60-day period?
No, I'm looking at like a 45-day total through to council.
Okay.
Just not June. June's a different matter.
Right, because that's year end.
Right.
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 Okay.
And in terms of reviewing the information, it comes to this committee before it goes to council.
Right.
So that we can do exactly what we're doing now, which is to keep asking questions until we're comfortable moving it on to the council.
Right.
Mr. Howell?
I think going back to his original question, the question is, when are the books closed?
As soon as the information has been input completely for all the activities that occurred during the month in question.
No, I'm getting to the point that, yes, you can take and start filing the report, but you talk of a soft close, and then it also goes to the council. Nothing is really finalized until it goes past the city council, right? And also the
Correct.
real true balance doesn't happen until the audit has been done at the
For
end of
June.
the year.
For June, yes.
And, no, I'm saying at the end of the year, and that might be 2 years down the road.
Could be.
So, I mean, we have to be very little pointed, I think, when we start talking about when is it closed?
Right. The year is closed when the audit is complete. The year is closed, but the
I'm
months.
confused to the audits input in here. Typically, I would expect to see a close. That's closed. The auditors may review it, but are they changing the information, or are they recommending adjusting entries?
We are going through the process of recommended adjusting entries right now.
Would you repeat that?
We're going through the process of reviewing the entries that have been brought up by the auditors.
And is that an unusual thing that's occurring now, and that will end at some point in time?
Not in the city of Beaumont. We just issued fiscal 15 in March. We're now working on fiscal 16.
Yeah,
we have not
Right.
caught up. So they are reviewing fiscal 16 now, and as they have recommended adjusting journal entries, which I posted one this morning,
Okay.
then we talk about it and I make the entry. So the general ledger for fiscal 16 is not closed.
It's a mess.
Okay.
I'll tell you, it's a
Well,
mess.
we don't need to go there. Okay, so is there a point on the horizon somewhere where it's anticipated that the city of Beaumont will be back in a normal procedure and there won't be anything
Yes.
except an adjusting entry? The entries that are already there are there, they will stay there. There may be an adjusting entry recommended by the auditor.
Yes.
Is there a time frame when that is expected to occur?
We're trying to get 16 closed. 17 should be much more normal, and we'll be able to get the 17 audit started right away. Then we'll be back on a regular timeline. We should be in the same timeline as any other city.
So fiscal year 17-18?
In fiscal year 16-17. As soon as we get fiscal year 15-16 closed, we will begin the audit for fiscal 16-17. That one will hopefully be done in January, and we'll be back on a regular timeline so that we can meet all the different deadlines. And then 17 will be closed and will only be in the current year, which would be 17-18.
Okay, and at that point in time, there won't be any physical adjustments
Correct.
to any entries. It would only be an adjusting entry.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the catch-up process has been so long.
And then that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm just wanting a
No,
point
I know, but it's.
where we expect it will happen. Whether it can happen or does happen is another story.
And it should be, we're anticipating that it will be on the same cycle as every other city, with the same close, the same turning over to the auditors, the same reporting out from the auditor's schedule as any other city. We're hoping in early 2018. In other words, January to March, which is the normal cycle.
Right.
Alana, can I ask something in here?
Sure.
On the discussion, when do you think that we could see an unaudited financial statement of the fiscal year 2017? Can we see that within 3 months after,
Oh, the unaudited for fiscal 17?
correct.
I can, once we have the accruals, which have to stay open for 60 days, so probably the first meeting in October, I should be able to provide a very rough draft of our fiscal 17 financial report.
I think that's what they're looking at on that. I mean,
Right.
not the audited, audited
The unaudited,
report will
right.
be on January 2018.
Right.
But we could review the
draft.
unaudited, and then we could comment and then submit it to the council.
As the unaudited, right,
That's correct.
right.
Thank you.
Any
Well,
other
now I
ones?
have a question about the general fund report. If I'm reading this correctly, it shows a surplus of 9.5 million,
Yes.
okay?
What page is she?
Um,
Sharon, what
Oh,
page are
that's,
you on?
is there page 15?
15 of
Shows
16.
the
All right.
surplus under the fiscal activity. So that's for the 11 months ended May.
Correct.
And then I had a question about the Department 3150 refuse.
Yes.
What do you think happened there with the budget, where it says?
It wasn't budgeted separately. Starting in 17-18 is when I've pulled everything related to the refuse contract separate, given it its own department and its own budget line item. So 17-18, the refuse activities of the city will be much more clear and traceable.
Was it in one of the other budgets, or?
I believe that the expense was in Department 3100.
Public Works, okay.
So,
Streets?
Yeah, same situation, building safety. I noticed there's no budget also prepared in that category, it seems like.
For 2150?
That's the total. It looks like there is a current total budget.
Right, there is a current total budget. That's one of the ones that when it came over, in the conversion, it came over zero. So I had to go through and find every line item and fix them. So what's in that current total budget, that's correct. That's what it was for this fiscal year 16-17.
The 354,707 total was the current budget.
That's the correct year fiscal 17 budget.
Okay, is that for city staff, or is that for somebody like Mr. Wilton?
Oh, no, personnel is city staff.
And do they show, for instance, outside contracting with building and safety on that department, or is it another category?
It depends on what it's for. If it's for building and safety, then it's going to be an operating cost for that department.
does the software, the new software, have the ability to print out what falls within these departments?
Absolutely.
Would it be possible to get that in some future meeting?
I can give you all the detail. I think it's about 40 pages.
I would
The
expect
line
that.
item by line item, I do have
I would
that
expect
available.
that. Yes.
So do you expect this 9.5 million to be the surplus at the end
Yes.
of the fiscal year?
Yes,
Wow,
yes.
nice.
You know what, helpful to me, because I'm not into the weeds kind of guy. I'm more of a big picture kind of guy. And I think our charge here is delve in the weeds. Obviously, you need to know what you're looking at in the weeds. Right now, I'm very confused with all these numbers popping up and all these different funds. We need to determine what we want to look at, number one. What kind of, are we looking at all?
Yeah, we're gonna go with that next.
Are we gonna,
How often? Yeah.
how often?
Right.
I have a simple suggestion. Like I said, I'm a minimalist. I'd like to see a report, and I don't know if it's possible or not, that would say the original total budget for that category, the period activity, the 3 month or 6 month or what, 9 months, the period activity, in other words, the expenditures out of that account, and then the percent remaining. To me, that gives me a good feel for what I'm looking at, budget, it was budgeted, this is the expenses, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, this is the amount of money remaining. I can go through that very quickly, not spend, 3 months looking at a report.
Right.
And determine that either this department is on track to spend what they're supposed to spend, or they're spending too much, or
Right.
it would simplify it a lot
Right.
for me.
Right.
So,
Right now, it's tough because column number 1 isn't really right. Column number 2 is your budget. Then 3 is just the month. 4 then is the year to date. 5 is how much your budget's left. Finally, you get the variance in column 6. So it's too much information in one report. If we could pull it and just have the 3 columns presented.
I think what you're talking about would be an exception report, and I understand that that's probably a very difficult thing to do at this point in time, but I would expect that at some point in time, we could just get a report that's the exception report, and it just reports out the categories that are not where we expect them to be. So they're exceptions. So they're either too high or too low, and you don't have to pay any attention to the other ones.
Right. We just have to set up what it is we're going to use for the criteria. Anything with a variance greater than 10% and $50,000, whatever it is that we will do. So right now we're still in rebuild mode. It's a little tough.
I've found that in the past, that's hard to do. It's really difficult because your revenues come in at different times.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Expenses
Right.
go out at different times. So to say you divide everything to 1/12 is not that simple. You don't, it doesn't, budgets don't work that way.
Yeah.
So that would kind of be my suggestion for the simplifying this.
Okay.
You can always provide as a backup to that, very detailed thing in case somebody wanted to go and do further research.
And I think the detail, too, comes to us annually when we're looking at the budget for each department. I mean, everything is broke out in such detail when we get that report. So I think looking back at any of these departments would be a comparison to that budget that we passed with all that data. I don't think it's something that we would want Milana to report to us. I'm very happy with the categories. The only ones I can see on here, Milana, that to me I wouldn't have to really look at is the fiscal activity column. The rest of them, though, I find I like knowing what the period, that particular period is, and I think knowing what the year-to-date current to budget for me is important. And I love the percentage remaining. I think that's
That one is the
really
easy one
easy.
to scan through and see some of the
just
stranger ones.
for an overall cursor of the data that's there. So I'm liking this. Go ahead, Nancy.
I see very few differences between the original total budget and the current total budget. On a few items,
It just came over
it's different.
odd.
Yeah.
And I can't explain some of it, and there's still a few that I haven't quite figured out where it went. But it's like they all came over,
Yeah.
just not in the right place. So it's been a little
So
bit
I
of a
could look
struggle.
at this, and I could ignore the
first
original
column.
total budget and just go current
this
total budget and
Yes.
just move to the right.
Yep.
Right.
And make more specific sense of it.
Right.
And I could see if there is one of these where the percent remaining or the variance is off too much, that then we could say we would like to understand the more detail on that department.
Sure.
Because there seems to be something we need to look at.
Right.
But most of the time, I think you're probably right. That's too much detail, and rather let's figure out how we need to tweak this so that a summary level of information is the most valuable for us.
Right. And then we can
Anytime
drill
we
down
want,
from that.
we'll get more detail
Okay.
on any one of them.
Yeah.
And in a way, now correct me if I'm wrong, it would almost be interesting to know what the historical percentage was as of date. I don't.
Not today.
In other words, not today.
In the future.
I understand.
So if let's say in a perfect world, this year we're at 48% of budget.
Last year, where
If
were
last
we?
year- So
Right.
that tells us that we're managing to budget better on a sort of ongoing running basis.
Okay.
That's the
Makes
only
sense.
value that and maybe nobody else agrees with that, but that kind
Yeah, I
of
think
tells us how we're tuning ourselves in both the amount that we're actually asking for in a budget and then what we're spending to.
Right.
Now, that may be some nice thing to have in the future. Right now, I'll settle for numbers going in right and closing and meeting auditors in the early 2018
Right.
cycle. But at some point forward, that might be nice to know just how well we're getting.
Right.
Because one of the things that some of the new committee members may or may not know is that we didn't operate with the real budget at times in the past. So this is a big step forward, but every one of these has to be an improvement step where we get closer and closer on the target, which is why I was thinking that the measuring of how well we're doing with the projection for the budget and then the spending, et cetera.
As a global number? That seems to make sense to me.
Yeah.
And then my question would be, would it make sense to just remove the original total budget since the new software doesn't have any correlation to that? I think it creates
will, but-
another question for
right.
somebody who's looking at this, particularly if this becomes a public document.
Right.
It takes an extreme amount of
You have to know what you're
time
looking
to explain it, and I don't see that it has a whole lot of value.
Yeah, I think once that number becomes a real number for us, then I think it's important to be there.
Yeah.
Right now, it's,
I
yeah,
think that's a good point. Maybe take it out till
right,
you get
it's-
to the point where you know that it's going to be reliable.
With 1718, it will be correct. So the difference will only be things that were approved by city council. Just conversion year is always a little hectic.
On the original, budget you got in here, you could take it out, but that would be nice to see your footnote in there. There's a revision. Actually, this current total budget is a revision of your original budget. Is that correct?
It's still a revision. It's just
That's what I'm
not
saying.
as much of a revision as it looks like in this
Yeah, how
report.
many revision you have in there
Right.
before you arrive on this, right?
Right.
That would be nice to have a footnote in there instead of just taking it out.
Sure, I can do
know?
that too.
Because we're in public, so they know
Right.
if they do a question, they will question you.
I like footnotes.
and Milana, these reports that we're looking at now, is this the same ones the council mentioned the other night that they wanted to see?
No,
Or-
this is at much greater detail
Okay.
than what they received.
Okay,
Because my thinking was the detail will be discussed here, which leads then to a more summarized version. So
That would go
council
over to
has
them.
some comfort in knowing that it's been looked at a greater level of detail here.
okay, because I know Mr. Laura had mentioned one of the, an additional comment, column that he wanted to see in the numbers. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at what they're wanting to see here.
Okay,
Before
so-
it's going over to them,
Got it.
right? So that we're making a recommendation. And they know that we, as a team, have reviewed the numbers that are coming over to council for them. I just want to make sure that we're apples to apples on that.
I will do that. I'll make sure that it's with the staff report, and then whatever level of detail will be behind that.
Right.
Okay.
Okay?
I can do that.
Is that good for council?
Yeah.
Is that good? Okay, okay.
Now that we've sort of simplified this, I think, to make it a little easier for us. too.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Now we need to, should we determine how often we want to do this, or is there a mandate by council to do it quarterly?
We need to
Well, and I think that's what I was kind of leading to is making sure that whatever the council wants to see, whether it's monthly, quarterly, bi-monthly, whatever, that we're reviewing those same reports that are going over to them prior to them getting the report. So is those monthly?
My original thought was that it would be monthly.
Okay,
That was what I was kind of running with.
okay. And that's on the ones that we're looking at now.
Yes, whatever
the general fund.
right, all of that. Theirs will just, like I said, not be quite so detailed. It'll be a lot more summarized. It'll be a lot shorter, but
Right.
it would be the same time frame. So it would always be when you get May, then the next council meeting, they get May. Then you get June, then the next council meeting, they get June. And we would continue.
Right, and I just want to make sure we stay on track with that, because that was kind of like one of our big developments of our committee, was for us to do the detailed grinding of the numbers before it went to council, so that they weren't having to do that again on their own.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that we're doing that here.
That is the plan.
And the
Okay.
treasurer report was one of the ones you hope to have monthly. It's just that you're having difficulty with it right now.
Right, it won't
Okay.
put any numbers in it.
All right, but I just wanted, that was a monthly one.
That is also monthly.
Yeah, okay.
In addition to, and that may be something, when I can get it to work, that we look at it and say, okay, now that it works, we want this, and now we don't want this.
These three.
Right.
Okay.
Because it was a nice level of detail that I thought anyway, and I know that's the one that you'd wanted to, Ray. It was a wonderful report, but I can't get it to populate, so.
I think that's the direction you want to go, because these things, they're very much
It's a lot of information.
Right.
It's too much, and we'll get buried in just
Exactly.
the minutia.
Right, which is why I thought, depending on what you like here, if there's certain ones that you're like, we want to be able to look at this grouping or these three in detail every time, we can pare it down so that those are always here and we don't do all of them or something, and I'm not sure.
I think once we get to that point, at least my thought is a monthly treasurer's report would be good. But for council, or maybe for this group, that we do
Something more in detail.
quarterly reviews.
Okay.
That way you're doing your first quarter budget review, and then goes to council, and we do the mid-year review with any adjustments that come from this
Right.
committee. But we do it quarterly, which is
Right, and then when we do the quarterly review, I see us looking at saying, okay, we need to make a budget adjustment for this or that or the other, then we can bring that to council at the same time, and you have something that's timely and relevant at the same time.
And Milana, I think one thing that's really important too is that we get these reports ahead of the meeting.
Yeah, that didn't work so well for me this last week, but that is always my intention, was to get them all scanned and sent. But there were so many of them too that I thought, if you get a report this size, you're not going to get very far through it before you wonder what I'm thinking. So,
Right. Yeah, I just think it going, when we're
yes.
actually getting the reports that we're reviewing, it's very important that we get copies of them, when the agenda comes out or whatever. And then that way we've got a few days to go through them, drill down, highlight, do our questions, whatever we need to do, and then be able to come here and ask you.
get the questions answered. Absolutely. The intention is that when you get the agenda, this will already be there. So,
Okay.
in the future, that is the absolute intent.
Ray, did you have a question?
No, I'm fine. I'm fine on the quarterly. I mean, that's excellent.
Okay.
So you could see the trend of the transaction. If you have every month you see it, you don't see the trend on that.
Right.
Okay?
Right. You start losing it. Right.
But I do think that now I haven't seen the treasurer report yet, but if it's, like you said, a very valuable report, I don't see anything wrong with the Finance and Audit Committee every month
Reviewing
getting
it.
the treasurer's
Absolutely.
report.
Yeah.
So that we have that level of information. That doesn't mean that we're going to give council a monthly treasurer's report, but it seems to me it's valuable for us to see that. If it's the great report you think it is, then that would be very useful
Right.
for us. And then we might be able to even pull out of that information that we want to make sure it gets summarized
Yes.
in the quarterly report.
And then do the more drilled down report on a quarterly basis. Okay.
And we can even pick the specifics in looking at the report. The treasurer's report is really activity based, so the budget's not there. It's really saying, how did this change? How's this changed? How's this? And it goes all the way down the line. And I think it's very helpful to know how everything is shifting on a monthly basis.
And I would expect at some point in time, the value of that will be able to identify those funds or those areas that just fluctuate like crazy, and then the ones that have been pretty consistent, and suddenly we've got an exception that's way out of whack.
Right.
And look at it instead
Right.
of trying to figure that out every month or so.
Right.
Mr. Hallowell, did you have a question?
Well, I've been trying to leaf through some of these pages while we were having this dialogue going between the members. And I became a little bit concerned in what I'm trying to look at here.
What's the page number so we can go along
Or
with
the
you?
grouping that you're looking at.
I'm looking at the citizens option, public safety, starting at the top of the page, and it's page 5 of 18.
Yes.
I'm also looking at
Got it.
the wastewater fund, page
Yes.
1 of 15. And I'm looking at transit fund, which is page 5 of 15.
Yes. Yes.
And when I look at this first page, it talks about personal services. And that's where I see something that takes and talks a little bit about something, but it doesn't really say what it's talking about. But then when I go to the next page and I look under personal services, and it lists the salaries, first aid, health insurance, etc.
Yes.
And then I go to the next one dealing with the transit fund, and personal services has salaries, overtime, has a multitude of things that are over and above. Is the
This is
first
the-
one because the department is a volunteer? The second one because it is contract basis and we're reimbursing their contract costs? And the other one is because there are real employees?
Well, the Citizens Option Public Safety, the restricted fund, that one is monies that come in for restricted purpose, and we have a very small amount in personnel services that we incurred against that grant. They have started a program, and that's something we're doing analysis for the June month, is there's certain personnel that do the specific duties that relate to what that COPS funding is for. We have to drill down and say how much of that salary is now applicable to this grant. We haven't done that yet.
So you're
this
talking
will
about
have
allocated from, like, a full-time personnel in the ARS that allocates some time to
correct
that?
and that's why there's no real personnel services cost in the COPS fund, because we haven't done what we need to do to get a number in there, but it'll be an allocation from an existing position that's recorded currently in the general fund. So that's an allocation we have to determine. For the wastewater fund, when you look at that, the salaries for that one is not very high. That's because we were able to hire, I think it's 1.5 persons. Sounds weird, but that just means one is not full-time with the wastewater plant. And so they don't have overtime. They didn't have a lot of the other classifications. All we have in the wastewater fund is salaries, and not for the amount of people that we were hoping to have. It's 1 of 15, and it's down in enterprise funds.
Thank you.
You get, it's a
1 of
little,
15.
1 of 15?
yeah, like I said, I should have stapled these all separate, but then that seemed a little cumbersome too. So,
1 of 15. Okay,
right.
Say that again.
So the wastewater fund, when you look at the personnel services cost for wastewater, there's salaries, first aid, health insurance, dental insurance. Those categories are all that apply to the 1.5 FTEs that we have that are designated towards this fund. So not everything applies. There's not any overtime in those positions, so that there's no line for overtime. When you move in just a little deeper to the transit fund,
Which is what page?
it's 5 of 15.
Okay,
So
got
keep
that
going down. See that? You look at that one and you'll see there's salaries, overtime, sick, holiday vacation, accrued time, other compensation, first aid, health, dental, workers' comp, disability, PERS, vision, life, Medicare. Then it starts over, salaries, and goes through that. Because there are people, and each one of these is a department. That second number tells me something. It's a department code. Whether it's the dial-a-ride, whether it's the fixed route, whether it's Route 120, those departments then mean something so that we can report that back to our CTC. But each one of these individual lines then do apply to that department. They did incur, right? If the balance was zero, it's not going to print that category. So that's why they look a little different. The COPS funding, the restricted fund, is different because we've allocated salaries to determine, and then wastewater has a different workforce than the transit fund does. Yes?
COPS funding, is that from grant?
That is a grant from the state of California, yes.
From the state?
Uh-huh.
Federal?
No,
COPS?
that is not a federal. I've asked that we never take federal funds, but I was told that's ridiculous. So I'm going to have to deal with federal funds, but it is not my favorite thing to do. So, because there's no single audit requirement currently, but that doesn't mean that that will always be the case.
Which year did we get the grant funding?
The COPS fund, we get it every year. It's one of the recurring grants from the state.
Recurring COPS funding?
So this level of detail that you see in transit, I can do that for every department. I just guessed you probably didn't want to see all of that.
No. I think that it's important when we're looking at the overall budget.
Right, then they
for the
show up all
year.
those line
I think
items.
that's very important to look at that, but personally, I wouldn't want to see that every month.
I get to look at it
You know,
every month.
like Nancy said, I think if we see a particular department that's like way out of line.
Right.
We might come back and say, wait a minute, we'd like kind of, let's drill down on this one a little bit more.
Right.
But I don't think we need to see that every single report.
And so when you look at wastewater and you see the personnel costs that we budgeted versus what we've incurred, and you're thinking, why? What happened? Well, hiring people into a wastewater treatment facility is not a slam dunk, and it's taken a little more time than we anticipated to get
Or
that
wanted it
part
to.
off the ground. So, but we're still moving in that direction and getting personnel, and then being able to rely less on the consulting group.
Okay. Do we think maybe a treasurer's report by next meeting?
I hope so, because
Okay.
like I
that's-
said,
you
I
got
have
a
my
ticket on it, right?
yes,
Okay.
and all they got to do is tell me why it didn't work, and then I'll be able to fix it up.
Any other questions?
On any of the funds, anything that I've given you, this first group that's stapled in its own, it's all of the different funds basically in the same format, so it gives you something to look at. The second grouping that I have stapled, a little different.
Is that the transfer summary?
Yes.
Okay.
I put that together thinking that it might be something this committee would want to look at. There's two different reports here. The first being the fund transfer summary. This tells you that we have transferred funds. So we've taken activity of some sort or other from one fund and we moved it to another fund. So it should always come to a net zero, right? It should always be wiping itself out. It's going back and forth. So when you see a total current budget of $720,000, I haven't figured out, that's the one I haven't figured out where that's at, because it should come to zero as well. You can't budget transfers other than zero. So I will figure that one out. But you can see in the year-to-date activity, you can see how much has been moved between the funds. So that if there's a question of a line item of why did we transfer this dollar amount from this fund and which other one did it actually go to, we can get into the detail and we can talk about what got moved and why. The second report is the one I like. It is the cash balance report. And it tells you how much cash the city is holding in total and how it relates to each one of the fund groups. So how much cash is being held for each one of the fund groups. So you can see the positive balance in all fund groups at May 31st, 2017, and then at June it will remain positive in all funds. But you can see that all of the cash funds are positive, which is huge because June of 16 it wasn't.
Is that something that you're going to be reporting to council on a monthly basis, or is this just something that we might want to take a look at? I mean, I'm not...
Well, this is something that the committee should always be aware of.
Right.
Absolutely. And then what I was hoping, it made sense to me, that Sharon, I do this report for you each month, and that becomes part of the treasurer's report to city council.
That would be nice, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, what's the grand total here?
Oh, I meant to tell you that I doubled my total. So there's a lot. In the top half, the grand total of 43017 is 68 million. That 124 million underneath it is just doubling of the 68 million. I meant to delete that line and I didn't. So that's just a mathematical
So
thing.
that line should be
Yeah,
deleted.
it doesn't go there. I got in a hurry.
I kind of thought that. but-
Right. So you can see the way that it's allocated between all the different fund groups equals the amount of the reconciled balances of each of the bank accounts too.
Okay.
I can see this as being a part of the treasurer's report on an ongoing basis. It may even be just receive and file that you know, and then council can ask you questions on it or pull it or whatever. But I could see where this would be very valuable.
Okay. Yeah. This is kind of what I was expecting.
I think it'd be good for you, Sharon.
This is, we're
Seemed-
getting there.
Seemed like a lot of
I know.
information,
We are
so
getting there, slow but sure.
Good.
yes.
Can I just say that I'm
stuff.
impressed that you were able to take all these questions and not be frustrated and pull your hair out.
Well, thank you.
I think it's an excellent job.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do too.
Can you,
Do I ever get to ask my question?
You do.
Yes, Sharon? Oh,
can you explain
gonna
this
take a question from the
fund
floor.
transfer summary again?
I'm sorry, for what?
Can you explain the fund transfer summary?
Okay, so that's where if, let's say, there are funds sitting in the gas tax fund, and we've utilized or we've had expenses in the general fund that qualify to use those gas tax funds, we do a transfer from gas tax into the general fund
So that you can pay.
so that we can then cover the costs that we incurred, which are recorded in the general fund.
So there's a budget.
Yes, there's a budget, yes.
Okay.
We do budget our fund transfers, so those are also taken into account. In fact, if you look at the restricted funds, their income statements, there is a budget for transfers, and the funds for AQMD, we did not use those this year, so even though we budgeted a transfer of, I think it was $10,000, we did not spend $10,000 in AQMD relatable items, so that will just continue to roll over in the AQMD fund. And the same thing has happened, I believe, with the PEG funds, that we did not spend all of those funds either that we had planned on. So those transfers we budget, but then sometimes we don't utilize the funds.
Do you see that one being one that you would want to see on a monthly basis, Sharon? Or is that something that you would want to see on a quarterly or semi-annual?
Quarterly, okay.
Okay. And then doing the other one on a monthly basis?
Got it.
Okay.
Okay.
Wait.
Okay.
Which is the correct financial statements?
The one that is not marked draft.
But the council voted on the draft.
Correct.
It's different from the one signed by Van Lent and Payco.
Correct.
So which is correct?
The one not marked draft.
Judy, are we staying with the reports that we have in front of us, or is this something totally different? Okay, let's stay with the reports that we have in front of us. Okay, so I think we're all in agreement that we're going to kind of hold off on making a final decision until we get the treasurer's report printed, which hopefully will be next meeting. And then we can make a final decision on these reports and how often we need them. It looks to me like it's going to be quarterly on this kind of detail, depending on what's in the treasurer's. Right? Okay.
Well, it looks like it's going to be quarterly modify people.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right, anything else on the reports? Okay. Okay, I was hoping that we would get an update from Todd on the classification and compensation analysis. Do you have anything on that, Milana?
I do.
Yay.
He had another meeting tonight, so he couldn't be here.
Okay.
But he did want me to let you know that the job surveys portion of the study are complete. Those are done. And they're now working on setting the benchmark cities. Once that pool has been developed, then it's going to council for approval of that list, and then they can continue working on the entire classification and compensation analysis, and we should get a report shortly after that. But I'm hoping, and he's hoping, that the list of cities to be compared with what we have here at the City of Beaumont will go to council next week. If not, it'll be the first meeting after that.
So that's a comparison between other cities and what they're paying versus what we're paying?
That's my understanding.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I would just, as a footnote, caution, and I'm sure he's doing a great job, but on these comparison analysis, you gotta make sure you're apples to apples, oranges to oranges, because
Yeah.
Right.
the city of San Bernardino really messed up. They were comparing cities down to the beach, and you just can't see what salaries comparing cities down to the beach.
Right, which is why the cities that they have, they're making a pool of cities to consider. That's why city council gets to say, yes, yes, no, yes, yes, yes.
And this is being done by the outside
Yes, that's
consultants,
not by us, correct.
Okay. Because I know we have the list that we can get from the state that shows the breakdown between cities, but a lot of times those are horribly off.
Right, and there's such a difference in economic factors in different locations.
Right.
And in the population size and the types of programs that are run by each of those cities. So, you really do have to look at some kind of grouping that makes the most sense. So that will be presented to council before they move forward.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Madam Chair, one of the other things we're looking at, I think, is also, when you're looking at apples, is the actual position itself.
Yes.
Each city has called something differently, and so sometimes you look at a position that may have more duties and responsibilities compared to one here, or vice versa, and then the pay differential is based on the amount of responsibilities.
Right, and I think that's why they started with all the job surveys, to try and give everyone the equal understanding of what the responsibilities are for different positions, make sure that they really do compare the right things. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I found when you try to do that is you can't just look at paper. You have to go back and actually physically have someone do some interview process so that you make sure that you are actually seeing the position as it's shown on paper.
We had a multiple level review of them. Employees all did one, all of them. They went to their supervisor or manager or director who got to make comments on it as far as if things do or don't apply or additional things maybe they left off. That then went to city manager and the director of administrative services. Then they went through them and made any notations they wanted to, and my understanding is that the consultant is going to select some of the employees to actually do a face-to-face interview with them to make sure that everything is clear, and then they'll be able to continue the process. So they're doing a lot of work with this.
What I was referring to is not necessarily that side of the equation. I'm referring to the other side of the equation. If you should say, pick the descriptions and the salaries as listed by the city of San Bernardino, you still have to somehow relate those to make sure that they are specifically related.
To
Because
what
you
we
could find
do.
that someone is a clerk 1 underneath ours and it's a clerk 0 under the other or something.
Right.
Yeah, and I think there's only so much of that they're going to be able to do unless it's a city that our consultants have actually worked with. I think it's pretty hard unless you're going to call every supervisor and say, does your clerk 2 do all these 20 different things in a day?
But the job descriptions, by using those and knowing what the job surveys are, hopefully will give them enough background that they'll be able to compare what the duties of one position are compared to the duties
Right.
of a different position. They are they're a nationwide firm, so I'm sure they've dealt with many of these different issues before. So like I said, we'll just kind of wait, see what they pick for their pool for council to select from, and then we'll see what their report says when they're done.
Okay.
Hard to know.
Okay. Yes, Judy?
Yes, well, you tell me when I can ask her this question, but I have a question to ask Ms. Taylor.
Okay. We have an agenda. We cannot go outside of that agenda. You were
So
giving.
I don't get my question answered tonight.
You
Is that
gave
what
us,
you're saying?
you gave us your input, I think we've kind of addressed that we need to look at that to make sure that whatever's on the website is correct. So we will be addressing it at that point, but no, we are not having a discussion on the point that you're making tonight. It's not on our agenda.
It's a simple question. And the fact that all of you are not concerned about it is disturbing at best.
Well, I'm sorry, Judy, but that's where this meeting is going tonight. We will try to check and make sure that what is showing on the website is correct.
Council didn't vote on the financial statements.
That you need to deal
that
with council
she is
with.
talking about.
Okay.
I just want all of you to know that. They never voted on those financial
Thank you.
statements.
Okay, thank you. That's something we'll
And you
take up.
should be very concerned about that. If
Okay.
you're not doing your job.
Okay, let's move on to future agenda items. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to put on a future agenda? We know we're going to come back next meeting with the treasurer's report and a more updated.
Would you give us a staff report where you re-summarize just what the reports are and whether we're doing monthly or quarterly per your understanding, so that then we can just say that's what we thought we agreed to or didn't? If you'll do that, and you can word the treasurer's report however you feel is appropriate on that. I figured that would get us all on the same page, making sure that we all understood we heard the same thing.
Yeah.
If we repeat that, thank you.
And I think if we bring back the reports that you've given us this month, bring those to our next morning, we'll just bring our own material back. We can still look at what you've given us in the detail and then compare it to the treasurer report and then, and then kind of make our final decision on that. So if everybody could bring these reports back with them next month. Okay. Anything else?
Could we ask staff also, could we put on as an agenda item, asking staff to just tell us where we are in the audit process with an update in writing on where we are for each one of the audits and what we anticipate?
For timelines?
For a timeline.
Okay.
And could be included in that any potential discrepancy on the information that's generally accepted on audits that have already been approved by council, that question that we have, so that that's answered in writing.
Can you repeat that back one more time?
Did I? There's a question on a mixed message on the past audit, on whether what's been approved by council is the information that's readily available to everybody else.
On the website.
So if you would include that in the audit summary, the clarification or answer to that, and if there is any discrepancy, then what was done to fix it or whatever, so that we can put that to bed, I would appreciate that.
Okay. And that would be also the portion that we're going to look at the website to make sure what was approved by council is truly what is posted.
That's sort of the finding of the result
Okay.
of that. If that's included in the audit summary
Sure.
for that, then it'll all
Say
be in one
2015 audit, make sure you say that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ridiculous.
Okay.
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
I can't recall everything that happened at the last council meeting, but Ms. Bingham brought up some additional points that I think that Melania might want to discuss with the city manager relative to some of the duties of the committee as required by other statutes that we are not normally looking at. And I think those questions need to be looked at and possibly referred to legal counsel.
Well, and I think that's something that needs to be done on council's agenda, not something that would come in to ours. Do you believe that it's something that we would be involved in? Because we're working at the direction of the council. We don't.
I'm concerned about one of her earlier remarks that says that we're not following what we're supposed to fiduciarily do according to as what she understands the law reads.
Okay, then that's something that she needs to direct.
And I say that from the standpoint that you, and everyone else here wants to make sure that we are doing what we're supposed to do.
Okay. Not something
Yeah,
we're not going to get into discussing this. It's not on our agenda. So we are going to walk away from this.
Didn't we cover this when we talked about what the responsibility of this committee was?
Yes.
In a prior meeting? Didn't we cover this? I thought this was covered. I'd like to not
Any citizen can raise
put it on the
a
next
question
agenda till we.
of legality, and it's always referred to the city attorney.
Right. It's not something we get in.
No.
No.
I agree.
Okay. Anything else on future agenda? Okay, so the last item that we're going to try to do at every one of our meetings is to do a wrap-up for the treasurer's monthly report to council. So it's kind of like just a roundup of things that you might want to put in your report to council, or we think is important to put into council's review. Did I say that correctly? Okay, I hope I did.
Yeah, what I usually do is go through the agenda items and just put highlights of things that I think they might want to know that we talked about. You know, that we talked about the audit report and some of the things that are not quite up to speed yet. The reports that we looked at, and that we'll be getting a treasurer's report hopefully at our next meeting. A couple of points on the classification and compensation. And usually I'll say future agenda. So I usually don't go into a lot of detail.
No, and I don't think it's, not unless council wants more detail about the point that you're making. But I think just what I'm getting out of this is that we reviewed available reports and that we're going to bring back the treasurer report next meeting and then make a decision on what reports that we're going to be looking at on a monthly versus a quarterly basis.
Right.
Is that pretty good?
I would think that an important point to make to council would be that we did review the reports, and at the next meeting, we're giving a final discussion or recommendation on what's a monthly report, what's a quarterly report, and what would be going to council. So I think the clarity of that would be good for council to know that that's the benchmark where we are. We've looked at the reports, we've discussed what should be monthly and quarterly. Staff is going to summarize, and we'll give approval or modification on whatever that agreement is at the next meeting. And going
also
forward, that's how we do it.
And also that we're coinciding with the reports that will be going to council. I think that's, you know, that we'll be reviewing that data that goes to them so that we're following along with
I think that's good.
what we're supposed to be doing here.
So basically, our motion, a month, 2 months down the road after we receive these documents, will be moved to approve the review of blank and recommend the review to council.
It'll be an action item at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
have an issue with the holiday conflict for the next
Yeah,
meeting.
oh, thank you. I didn't have it written as an item down here.
And
Okay,
at the
so we
same
have,
time,
yeah,
should we look at the calendar and see what Monday holidays, since we're meeting on Mondays, and how many of those holidays occur during the year, and see what kind of future issue that might
I'll do that for next meeting and
Okay.
see if there's any other ones, because we did have that for, what was it, July 4th, right? So we met the end of one month instead of doing that and then skipped over, so. September's calendar, let's see, the 5th is Labor Day. I'm in 2016, thank you. 2017 would be the right month. Okay, Labor Day, September 4th. Okay, so then the following 3 weeks are no holidays. We have the 11th, the 18th, and the 25th. Would everybody be agreeable to meet on September 11th? How's your,
I think I'm good.
I think you're good? How about
The
you, Mike?
18th is not so good, but
Okay, so,
the 11th should be okay.
so is everybody good for the 11th?
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Can't say.
Okay.
Finishing up Avon 39, so I may not be able to walk.
Oh, okay.
Oh, dear.
Well, we will definitely excuse you if you can't make it. That will not be an unexcused absence.
I may not be
Okay,
able
so
to make,
our next meeting's going to be at the 11th?
I may not be able to make that meeting.
Are you going out of town?
A wedding,
Ah,
yes.
That's how I heard it.
Did you write that down, Julie?
I think if we take it any further than the 11th, the problem we're going to have is we run too close to our meeting on the 2nd of October.
I will do my best to get here, but
Okay.
I may not
Okay.
be able to. After 39 miles in 2 days, I'm not too sure.
Okay, all right,
Goodness. I wouldn't be too sure either.
yeah. Okay, so let's make it September 11th, if that's the majority of our group, that we can make it on the 11th. So that'll be at 6 PM on September 11th. Okay. And if we have nothing else, we'll adjourn our meeting at 7:47.